There is a moment in every INFJ's life when their energy changes, a moment so quiet that most people miss it, yet so powerful that it marks the point of no return. It happens when the INFJ finally stops explaining themselves. No more clarifying intentions, no more defending their character, no more trying to prove their heart. The silence that replaces those explanations is not weakness, it is judgment. It means they've seen enough, understood everything, and decided their energy is too valuable to waste where it's not respected. And the truth is simple. When an INFJ stops explaining, they're no longer trying to stay. They're preparing to walk away. This shift is what people should fear, because INFJs don't withdraw out of confusion, they withdraw out of clarity. They've already connected the dots, recognized the patterns, and understood the emotional math of the situation. They know what's being taken for granted, what's being manipulated, and what will never change. Their silence becomes the boundary that no apology, excuse, or charm can cross. It's the moment they realize their peace matters more than someone else's comfort. And once they understand, reaches this inner certainty, the relationship dynamic is already over. Even if the conversation hasn't ended yet. And here's the part most never see coming. INFJs don't make dramatic exits. They leave emotionally first, mentally second, and physically last. By the time they've stopped explaining, their heart is already gone. Their silence is not passive, it's final. It is the INFJ saying, I understand you completely, and that's why I'm done. If you want more deep INFJ psychology and human behavior insights, make sure you subscribe to Brainy Quiet Mind so you never miss a breakthrough video. Before we continue, comment "Silence is my answer" to show you're one of the INFJs who speaks the loudest without saying a word. They stop justifying their boundaries and enforce them without emotional explanation. There comes a moment when an INFJ realizes that explaining their boundaries to someone who doesn't respect them is just another form of self-betrayal. At first they try, patiently clarifying their needs, offering understanding, softening the truth so it doesn't hurt the other person. But once they've seen the pattern of disrespect, dismissal, or selective listening, something inside them shifts. They stop justifying the boundary and simply enforce it. No apologies, no emotional footnotes, no gentle rewrites to make the other person more comfortable. Their no becomes final, calm, and unarguable. And that stillness is what people should fear, because it means the INFJ is no longer negotiating their worth. This shift is subtle but unmistakable. The INFJ no longer over-explains why they need space, why a behavior crossed the line, or why they can't carry the emotional weight of a situation anymore. Instead, they act. They step back from conversations that drain them. They stop responding to emotional bait. They decline invitations that disrespect their peace. And they don't freestand the changes in a way fiends are seeking validation. Their boundaries transform from soft guidelines into immovable truths. Anyone who tries to push against them suddenly finds themselves facing a version of the INFJ that is clear, firm, and impossible to sway. This is not coldness, it is emotional survival refined into strength. Over time, this new firmness exposes the reality of the relationship. People who cared only about the INFJ's compliance begin to feel threatened. Those who depended on their emotional flexibility begin to panic. The INFJ's silence, their calm refusal, their unshakable presence, it reveals who valued them and who valued control. And for the first time, the INFJ doesn't feel guilty for choosing themselves. They recognize that boundaries don't need justification, they need commitment. When the INFJ reaches this stage, explanations end and empowerment begins. Their boundaries become a quiet declaration: I will no longer shrink to fit a space that does not honor me. They no longer correct misunderstandings, allowing people to reveal their true intentions. When an INFJ stops explaining themselves, the first thing they withdraw is the instinct to correct misunderstandings. Normally, they clarify everything, their intentions, their tone, their choices, because they want harmony and fairness. But once they've seen someone twist their words, ignore their clarity, or use confusion as a weapon, the INFJ makes a silent decision. Let them think what they want. This isn't resignation. It's strategy. They stop correcting the narrative because they realize the narrative people choose reveals far more about them than about the INFJ. And as the misunderstandings grow, the INFJ watches quietly, gathering truth from every assumption that slips out. People who valued the INFJ will come forward to ask, listen, or understand. People who sought control will use the misunderstanding to manipulate, blame, or guilt. And the INFJ sees all of it without lifting a finger. Their silence becomes a test, not a punishment. Instead of spending emotional energy fixing perceptions, they allow the other person's choices, reactions, and accusations to expose their real intentions. It's in this silence that the INFJ's intuition becomes razor sharp. They see who is willing to communicate and who is eager to distort. They see who respects them and who only respects convenience. And they learn more in the quiet than they ever learned in the conversations. As time passes, the INFJ's refusal to correct misunderstandings becomes their shield and their filter. They no longer chase people who misinterpret them. They watch who chooses to understand them. And the distance they create reveals every hidden loyalty and every hidden agenda. The INFJ stops trying to shape perceptions because they finally understand something powerful. Truth does not need their defense. It stands on its own. So they step back, let the silence speak, and let people reveal themselves through the stories they choose to believe. And that quiet clarity is the point where the INFJ's emotional freedom begins. Their silence becomes a mirror that exposes the other person's behavior more than words ever could. When an INFJ stops explaining themselves, their silence becomes the most powerful truth-telling tool in the room. Instead of reacting, defending, or justifying, they step back and let the other person's actions echo into the quiet space they've created. And in that stillness, something remarkable happens. The other person begins revealing who they truly are. Silence becomes a mirror, clear, unforgiving, and honest, without the INFJ's emotional cushioning or careful phrasing, smoothing the edges. The other person's patterns, motives, and inconsistencies stand naked. The INFJ doesn't need confrontation. They don't need to point out hypocrisy or manipulation. Their silence does it for them, reflecting behavior with a clarity no words could ever produce. As the INFJ withdraws their explanations, people begin reacting to their own reflection. Someone who depends on conflict suddenly feels exposed for stirring it. Someone who relies on guilt feels their tactics falling flat. Someone who hides behind excuses realizes the INFJ's silence will not absorb or validate them. The INFJ watches, calm, still, observant, as the other person's true nature rises to the surface. Silence removes the emotional buffer that once protected them from the consequences of their own behavior. And because the INFJ is no longer participating in the emotional dynamic, the other person is forced to confront themselves. It is in this quiet confrontation the truth becomes unavoidable. Over time, the INFJ's silence becomes both a boundary and a revelation. Those with genuine hearts feel the weight of the quiet and come forward with honesty and accountability. Those with questionable intentions grow uncomfortable, defensive, or aggressive, exposing themselves further. The INFJ doesn't need revenge, proof, or argument. The silence reveals everything, and the INFJ trusts what is revealed. For them, this is the moment clarity anchors itself. They finally see who stands with them, who stands against them, and who is only ever standing behind their own reflection. Through silence, the INFJ discovers the truth that words can only hide. And once they see it, the relationship will never return to what it was. They withdraw their empathy, giving the person nothing left to manipulate emotionally. There is a very specific moment when an INFJ stops explaining themselves. The moment they withdraw their empathy, not their kindness, not their humanity, their emotional accessibility. The channel that once absorbed every tone shift, every emotional cue, every unspoken need suddenly closes, and without warning, the INFJ becomes unreadable. This shift is subtle but seismic. Their empathy, which once acted like an emotional sponge, stops absorbing entirely. The person who relied on guilt, emotional pressure, or subtle manipulation finds themselves hitting a wall of calm neutrality. The INFJ gives them nothing, no reaction, no emotional feed, no opening to exploit. Their silence becomes not just a boundary but a shield. As this withdrawal deepens, the INFJ's emotional field becomes smooth and impenetrable. They no longer feel responsible for the other person's feelings. They no longer bend themselves into emotional shapes to keep the peace. They no longer automatically soothe tension or decode hidden motives. Instead, they watch the emotional game from outside it, untouched. The person who once depended on the INFJ's empathy to maintain control begins to panic. Their usual tactics, guilt tripping, emotional baiting, dramatic reactions, fall flat. Nothing lands, nothing penetrates. And this is when the truth becomes impossible to deny. The INFJ has disconnected emotionally, and once they disconnect, there is no pathway back. Over time, this absence of emotional absorption exposes everything. Without access to the INFJ's empathy, the person must confront their own emotions instead of projecting them. Without the INFJ carrying the emotional weight, their patterns become obvious and unfiltered. And the INFJ, now grounded and centered, sees the dynamic clearly for the first time, free from distortion, free from emotional noise, free from obligation. Their empathy is not a weakness, it is a gift, and when they withdraw it, they reclaim their power. People fear an angry INFJ, but the truth is far more unsettling. Fear the INFJ who feels nothing where they once felt everything. They respond with calm detachment instead of emotional investment. When an INFJ reaches the point where explanations no longer matter, their responses undergo a quiet transformation. The emotional warmth, the layered empathy, the subtle understanding they once offered disappears, replaced by a calm, steady neutrality. They stop reacting from the heart and start responding from clarity. Their tone softens, not with care, but with distance. Their words become fewer, clearer, and stripped of emotional cushioning, and their presence, once deeply engaged, becomes cool and self-contained. This calm detachment is not indifference. It is a sign that the INFJ has withdrawn their emotional investment. They're no longer trying to fix, persuade, or preserve anything. They're only observing and choosing their next step with absolute composure. As this detachment takes root, interactions begin to shift dramatically. Arguments lose their power because the INFJ no longer steps into them. Manipulation fails because the INFJ no longer absorbs the emotional bait. Pressure dissolves because they refuse to carry it. Even affection loses its influence if it's being used as a tool rather than a truth. The person on the other side senses this shift immediately, not because the INFJ becomes cold, but because they become unreadable. Their reactions no longer reflect the other person's expectations. Their peace cannot be provoked, their clarity cannot be shaken, and their emotional detachment removes the leverage that once held them in unhealthy dynamics. Over time, this calmness becomes the INFJ's quiet announcement that the relationship has entered its final stage. They don't explain the change because they don't need to. Their silence says, "I've seen enough." Their neutrality says, "I'm done participating in this pattern." And their calmness says, "I'm no longer emotionally available to be pulled back in." This is the phase where the INFJ becomes untouchable, not through force, but through inner certainty. When an INFJ responds with calm detachment, the emotional thread connecting them to the situation has already been severed. And once that thread is gone, they never tie it back. They stop fixing the relationship and let the natural consequences unfold. When an INFJ stops explaining themselves, the next shift is even more revealing. They stop fixing the relationship. No more emotional bandages. No more overcompensating. No more making excuses for the other person's behavior or giving gentle reminders that go ignored. The INFJ simply lets things fall where they may. And this is the moment when the true stability of the relationship becomes visible. Their withdrawal of effort exposes how one-sided things have been. The emotional labor they once provided, smoothing misunderstandings, initiating reconciliation, anticipating needs, disappears. And without their constant balancing act, the cracks reveal themselves with painful clarity. As the INFJ steps back, they resist the urge to intervene, soothe, or repair. Not out of spite, but out of realization. They have seen the pattern, seen the imbalance, and finally understood that a relationship built on their sacrifice will collapse without their constant input. So they stop carrying it. They stop being the emotional glue. The INFJ allows silence to replace explanations and distance to replace effort. Meanwhile, the other person begins encountering the consequences of their own behavior, miscommunications they once blamed on the INFJ, emotional tension they previously avoided, or the emptiness created by their lack of reciprocity. The relationship shifts into a state of truth, a truth the INFJ no longer shields anyone from. Over time, this non-intervention becomes the INFJ's quiet verdict. They no longer chase resolution because they no longer believe the relationship deserves saving. They let the dynamic unfold naturally, revealing exactly who was committed and who was complacent. And in that unfolding, the INFJ gains clarity about the one thing they needed to see most, what the relationship looks like when they stop holding it together. It is in this space, calm, detached, and observant, that the INFJ chooses their final path. Because once they stop fixing things, they're already preparing to let go. They become unreadable, no reactions, no explanations, just quiet certainty. When an INFJ reaches the point where they stop explaining themselves, their entire emotional presence shifts into something people struggle to interpret. The INFJ becomes unreadable, not cold, not hostile, but entirely self contained. Their expressions flatten into calm neutrality. Their tone evens out. Their energy withdraws inward like a tide pulling back before a silent storm. They stop giving emotional cues, stop revealing what they feel, stop offering reactions that used to guide the other person's behavior. And this unreadability is not a mask, it's a boundary. It signals that the INFJ has reached clarity, and once clarity arrives, they no longer need to reveal anything more. In this state, attempts to provoke a reaction fall flat. Accusations don't pierce them. Guilt trips don't move them. Charm no longer influences their decisions. The INFJ listens, but without revealing whether they agree, disagree, care, or have already mentally stepped away. And because their intuition is still active beneath the quiet surface, they see everything the other person is trying to hide. But unlike before, they don't respond to it. They simply observe. Their silence becomes impenetrable. Their reactions are minimal. Their presence becomes a steady, unmoving force that others cannot manipulate or decode. This unreadability makes people anxious because it removes the emotional leverage they once relied on. Over time, this quiet certainty becomes the INFJ's most powerful stance. It means they've made their internal decision and no longer need external validation, reassurance, or conversation to confirm it. They have stopped explaining not because they're confused, but because they finally understand everything. Their unreadability is the final transformation, a sign that they no longer operate from emotion, but from truth. And once an INFJ reaches this level of calm detachment, the relationship's outcome is already decided. Nothing can sway them, nothing can pull them back. Their silence becomes the full stop at the end of a chapter they have already closed. They detach internally, preparing their exit long before taking physical action. When an INFJ stops explaining themselves, the true shift doesn't happen in their words. It happens in their mind. Long before they leave physically, they begin detaching internally in a way that is silent, irreversible, and almost invisible to those who aren't paying attention. Their heart stops investing. Their intuition stops giving the benefit of the doubt. Their emotions stop reaching out for connection. The cords that once tied them to the relationship loosen one by one, not with anger, but with clarity. They observe the dynamic from a safer distance, no longer pulled into emotional cycles or false hopes. This internal detachment is the INFJ's quiet turning point, the moment they begin choosing peace over persistence. As this detachment grows, their behavior changes in subtle but unmistakable ways. They stop initiating conversations. They stop sharing vulnerable parts of themselves. They stop fighting for understanding, for fairness, for balance. Their silence becomes their refuge. Their neutrality becomes their shield, and their distance becomes their protection. The person on the other side often misreads this as moodiness or withdrawal, not realizing the INFJ is already halfway out the door emotionally. By the time the INFJ stops explaining themselves, the emotional exit has already happened. What remains is simply waiting for the right moment to align their outer actions with their inner truth. Eventually, the INFJ reaches a point where leaving no longer feels like a choice. It feels like the natural conclusion of everything they've observed. Their internal detachment gives them strength, clarity, and certainty. They no longer analyze, hope, or negotiate. They no longer feel obligated to stay in a space that drains their spirit. And when the moment comes to physically step away, they do it quietly, calmly, and without hesitation. But the truth is this: the goodbye happened long before the departure. The INFJ doesn't leave suddenly. People just don't notice the silent exit that began in their heart months before. They replace emotional labor with self-preservation, choosing peace over connection. When an INFJ stops explaining themselves, One of the most transformative shifts happens quietly inside them. They stop pouring emotional labor into a relationship that only drains them. For years, they've been the one who understands, who softens conflict, who anticipates needs, who interprets mixed signals, who holds the emotional weight others refuse to carry. But when clarity arrives, when they finally see the imbalance, the misuse of their empathy, or the exhaustion in their own spirit, something inside them snaps into alignment. They stop giving what is not reciprocated. They stop investing in connections that cost them their peace. And instead of reaching outward, they turn inward, choosing self preservation over emotional sacrifice. As this shift unfolds, their priorities transform. They begin valuing silence over forced conversation, calm over chaos, distance over draining closeness. They stop trying to repair relationships that fall apart the moment they stop holding them together. They recognize the difference between genuine connection and emotional dependency, and they detach from anything that feeds on their energy instead of respecting it. People around them feel the change immediately. The INFJ's warmth becomes measured, their availability becomes limited, their emotional responses become intentional instead of automatic. They no longer feel responsible for managing someone else's insecurities or soothing every emotional fluctuation. Their heart begins choosing rest, clarity, and balance over obligation. Over time, this shift becomes a complete realignment of how they love, give, and protect themselves. The INFJ realizes that their peace is not something they should sacrifice to keep a connection alive. It is something they must defend to stay alive within themselves. And once they choose self preservation, their spirit grows lighter, their intuition sharper, and their boundaries stronger. They no longer chase emotional harmony in relationships that consistently break it. They choose their well being over their role as an emotional caretaker. And that moment, when an INFJ replaces emotional labor with peace, is when their life begins to change in ways they never explain, but always feel deeply. They walk away without warning because the decision was made long before they expressed it. By the time an INFJ walks away, the goodbye has already happened inside them weeks or even months earlier. Their exit seems sudden to others, but to the INFJ, it is simply the final step of a long internal process no one ever saw. They do not threaten to leave. They do not announce ultimatums. They do not create dramatic scenes. Instead, they observe, they understand, and then they detach silently, completely, irreversibly. When they finally walk away, it is not out of impulse or anger, it is out of clarity. The INFJ doesn't leave when things fall apart. They leave when they have gathered enough truth to know things will never change. As the INFJ approaches this decision, their behavior becomes subtly but unmistakably different. They stop initiating conversations. They stop offering emotional labor. They stop trying to repair what keeps breaking in the same places. Their silence grows heavier, their distance deeper, and their expressions harder to read. People often misinterpret this as temporary withdrawal, expecting the INFJ to return once emotions settle. What they don't realize is that the INFJ is already building emotional walls to protect themselves from a pain they no longer intend to endure. Their heart has already stepped back, and once the heart goes, the rest of them follows calmly, quietly, and without reversal. When the INFJ finally walks away, they do so with a peace that confuses the very people who took their presence for granted. There is no explanation, no confrontation, no dramatic closure, because the INFJ no longer feels the relationship deserves that emotional investment. The silence that follows is the final truth. They stayed long after they were hurt, tried long after it was hopeless, and explained themselves long after they should have stopped. Walking away is not the INFJ giving up. It is the INFJ choosing themselves. And once they make that decision internally, no apology, no promise, no persuasion can bring them back. Their exit was written the moment they stopped explaining. When an INFJ stops explaining themselves, the entire dynamic changes. Their silence is not confusion, it's clarity. Their distance is not coldness, it's protection. Their detachment is not impulsive. It's the final chapter of a decision they made in the privacy of their own intuition. People who never listen to their words suddenly feel the weight of their absence, and those who underestimated their boundaries finally understand what it means when an INFJ chooses peace over connection. The truth is simple. You never lose an INFJ in a moment. You lose them slowly, silently, and long before they walk away. If you want more deep psychology breakdowns, INFJ insights, and hidden emotional patterns decoded with precision, make sure you subscribe to Brainy Quiet Mind so you don't miss the next video. Before you go, comment "Silence reveals everything" to show you truly understand the power of an INFJ who stops explaining.